Hey everyone, imagine a city born not from fertile land or strategic mountains, but from the very sea itself, a place where refugees fled barbarian hordes and built an empire from mud and sheer will. This is the incredible thousand-year saga of the Venetian Republic, a story of unparalleled power, breathtaking art, and fierce independence. But what happens when even the most serene and enduring of republics faces a force it cannot outwit, outlast, or outfight? Before we start, I would like to know where you are watching this video from, and what time is it? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, while you are at it, please do like and subscribe so we can bring out more content like this. Now let's get started. The sea, a canvas of shifting blues and greens, can be a merciless master. Yet it was precisely from its embrace that an empire was born, not from fertile plains or strategic mountain passes, but from the very edge of the known world, where land dissolved into water, rose a city unlike any other. Venice, the serene republic, did not begin with grand pronouncements or a conquering army. It began with fear, with desperation, and with the relentless lapping of the Adriatic against a collection of forgotten islands. This is the story of its improbable birth. It tells of how a scattering of refugees, fleeing the thunder of barbarian hooves, forged a destiny from mud, reeds, and an unyielding will to survive. The Roman Empire, once the undisputed colossus of the Western world, was crumbling. Its vast network of roads, its legions, its very institutions were failing under the weight of relentless barbarian incursions. From the bleak, windswept steppes of Asia, a terrifying force had emerged, the Huns, led by the infamous Attila, whose mere name struck terror into the hearts of men. They swept across the continent. In 452 CE, Attila and his horde descended into the rich plains of northern Italy. They left a trail of utter destruction in their wake. Save for one unlikely refuge, the desolate, marshy expanse of the Venetian lagoon. Cities like Aquileia, Concordia, and Padua, once bastions of Roman civilization, were reduced to rubble, their populations scattered like dust before a storm. The fertile lands, the very source of their sustenance, became a killing field. There was nowhere safe to go, no mighty walls left to offer protection. To these watery havens, the terrified inhabitants of the mainland fled. They were not warriors, but merchants, farmers, artisans, and their families. They carried what few possessions they could salvage. They pushed their small boats through the shallow, winding channels. They sought solace in the seemingly inhospitable environment. Here, amidst the shifting sandbanks and the dense thickets of reeds, they found a precarious sanctuary. The lagoon, with its intricate network of waterways and its unpredictable tides, was a natural fortress. It was a place where no one would choose to live, yet it offered the one thing they craved above all else: survival. Attila's cavalry, so devastating on open ground, could not pursue them into this watery labyrinth. The very harshness of the environment became their shield. Life in these nascent settlements was brutal. The islands themselves were little more than muddy humps barely rising above the high tide. The refugees lived in makeshift huts, often built on stilts. They constantly battled the elements. There was no fresh water, no arable land, no timber for building. Everything had to be brought in from the mainland, a perilous journey across the treacherous waters. Malaria was rampant. The constant threat of flooding meant a perpetual struggle against the encroaching sea. Yet, from this crucible of adversity, a unique way of life began to emerge. They learned to fish the teeming waters. They learned to extract salt from the sea, a precious commodity in an age without refrigeration. And they learned to navigate the intricate channels with an unparalleled skill that would define their future. These early communities were scattered across various islands: Torcello, Malamocco, Jesolo, and later the Raltine Islands, which would eventually become the heart of Venice. Each settlement maintained a degree of independence. They were governed by elected tribunes who oversaw local affairs, administered justice, and organized the collective effort for survival. They were, in essence, a people without a land. Their identity was forged by the very waters that surrounded them. They were bound together not by a central authority, but by shared hardship and a common need for defense. Their existence was marginal, a testament to human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Nominally, these lagoon communities fell under the distant authority of the Byzantine Empire. This was the surviving eastern half of Rome, whose exarchate in Ravenna represented imperial power in Italy. It allowed the lagoon dwellers to develop their own customs, their own forms of governance, and their own economic strategies with minimal interference. The Byzantines, preoccupied with their own vast borders and internal struggles, paid little attention to these remote, impoverished outposts. This benign neglect, however, proved to be a critical blessing. While they acknowledged the emperor in Constantinople as their distant sovereign, their day-to-day lives were governed by local necessity and the practicalities of their unique environment. As the Lombard invasions intensified in the 6th and 7th centuries, further isolating the lagoon settlements from the mainland, the need for a more unified leadership became apparent. The scattered tribunes, effective for local administration, lacked the cohesive authority required for collective defense and coordinated action. The Byzantines, increasingly unable to provide direct protection, tacitly allowed for, or perhaps even encouraged, the emergence of a stronger local leader. Tradition, often interwoven with myth, places the election of Paolo Lucio Anafesto as the first doge in 697 CE. While historical records for this early period are sparse and often contradictory, the significance of this event cannot be overstated. This growing necessity culminated in a pivotal moment, the election of the first doge. The doge, a title derived from the Latin dux, leader, was initially a Byzantine military governor, but in the lagoon, the office quickly evolved into something far more. He was not merely an imperial appointee, but a locally chosen leader, responsible for both military defense and civil administration. His election symbolized a crucial step towards self-governance, a tacit declaration of independence from a weakening imperial grip. The early doges faced immense challenges. Their authority was often contested by powerful families and rival island communities. Some were deposed, others assassinated, reflecting the turbulent political landscape of a nascent state. Doge Soipato, for instance, elected in 726 CE, was a strong leader who asserted Venetian independence, but his rule ended violently. Doge Teodotoipato, his son, moved the ducal seat from Heraclea to Malamocco, a more central location. This signalled a gradual shift towards a unified identity. These early struggles, though violent, were formative. They forced the Venetians to experiment with different forms of governance. They learned to balance the power of the doge with the will of the people. In 828 CE, two Venetian merchants, Buono da Malamocco and Rustico da Torcello, undertook a daring and pious act. They travelled to Alexandria, Egypt, then under Muslim rule. Perhaps no event cemented Venice's unique identity and future destiny more profoundly than the acquisition of the relics of St. Mark the Evangelist. And they laid the groundwork for the complex republican system that would define them for centuries. With a mixture of cunning and audacity, they managed to steal the body of St. Mark. The legend tells of them hiding the sacred remains under layers of pork. This was done to deter Muslim customs officials who would not touch the forbidden meat. The arrival of St. Mark's body was a monumental moment. It provided Venice with a powerful patron saint. This was a figure of immense spiritual authority who could rival St. Peter in Rome. The journey back was fraught with peril, but the relics eventually arrived safely in the lagoon. St. Mark became the symbol of Venice. His winged lion emblem appeared on flags, coins and buildings, representing the Republic's strength, evangelism and sovereignty. He also rivaled St. Theodore, the previous patron of Venice, whose Byzantine origins were now seen as less fitting for an increasingly independent state. This act was not merely religious, it was a political masterstroke. It provided Venice with a distinct spiritual foundation, a divine mandate that bolstered its claims to independence and legitimacy on the European stage. In 810 CE, following a devastating Frankish invasion attempt by Pepin, son of Charlemagne, the Doge Angelo Participazio made a strategic decision. He moved the ducal seat permanently to the Rialto. With the relics of St. Mark now enshrined, the focus of the nascent republic began to coalesce around the Rialtine Islands. It was a declaration to the world. Venice was not just another Byzantine outpost, but a divinely favoured city with its own destiny. This cluster of islands, more centrally located and naturally defensible within the lagoon, offered a superior strategic position. It was here that the foundations of the future city of Venice would be laid. This included the construction of the first Doge's Palace and the original Basilica of St. Mark. This move was a critical step in unifying the disparate island communities into a single, cohesive urban centre. It marked the true birth of Venice as a city. The consolidation of power in Rialto coincided with the growing need to protect the burgeoning trade routes that were becoming the lifeblood of the lagoon communities. These Slavic raiders, operating from the eastern coast of the Adriatic, preyed on Venetian merchant vessels. They disrupted the vital flow of goods. While the Huns and Lombards had driven them to the sea, a new threat emerged from the sea itself, the Narentine pirates. Venice, born of the sea, now had to master it. The early Doges understood that their survival depended not just on defensive fortifications, but on projecting power across the waves. The development of a Venetian navy was a gradual but essential process. Initially, it consisted of small, agile boats, suitable for navigating the shallow lagoon. Increasingly, however, larger vessels were built for open sea voyages and combat. These early naval engagements, often against the Narentines, were crucial training grounds. They honed Venetian seamanship, tactics, and their understanding of naval logistics. Each victory, however small, reinforced the idea that Venice was not merely a refuge, but a maritime power in the making. The economic foundations of early Venice were surprisingly robust, given its challenging environment. Salt, extracted from the lagoon's waters through evaporation, was their first great commodity. It was a power capable of defending its interests and its people. These skirmishes were the first ripples of what would become a formidable naval force, one that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. It was essential for preserving food and was in high demand across Europe. Fishing also provided a stable source of sustenance and trade. However, Venice's true genius lay in its strategic location. Situated at the crossroads of east and west, it became a natural intermediary. Goods from the Byzantine Empire and the burgeoning Islamic world, spices, silks, precious metals, and exotic luxuries flowed into Venice. From there, they were transported across the Alps to the markets of Western Europe. In return, timber, slaves, and other raw materials from the west found their way to the east via Venetian ships. Venetian merchants became adept at navigating complex political landscapes. They negotiated with diverse cultures and managed intricate financial transactions. This intermediary role was not merely about transporting goods, it was about building relationships, understanding markets, and developing sophisticated commercial practices. They developed early forms of credit, maritime insurance, and commercial law. This laid the groundwork for a sophisticated mercantile economy. This economic prowess, born of necessity and nurtured by opportunity, provided the wealth and resources that would fuel Venice's expansion and secure its independence. The lagoon, once a barrier, became a gateway to immense prosperity. The early doggers, though powerful, were often autocratic, leading to assassinations and popular uprisings. This instability taught the Venetians a crucial lesson. Unchecked power was dangerous. As Venice grew in wealth and influence, its internal political structures continued to evolve. They moved beyond the absolute power of the Doge towards a more complex republican system. The most significant of these was the Concio, a general assembly of the people. It played a role in electing the Doge and approving major decisions. Over time, the Doge's authority was gradually curtailed and balanced by the emergence of various councils and assemblies. While the Concio represented a form of popular participation, true power began to gravitate towards the wealthier and more influential families, the nascent aristocracy. These families, whose fortunes were built on trade and shipping, formed a powerful elite. They sought to limit the Doge's power and ensure their own influence in the Republic's affairs. This slow organic development of a unique republican government, characterized by checks and balances, was a remarkable achievement for its time. It ensured a degree of stability that allowed Venice to flourish. This gradual shift laid the groundwork for the later Great Council, the true legislative body of the Republic. It would eventually become the preserve of a closed patrician class. The relationship between Venice and the Byzantine Empire remained central to its early development. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of dependence, defiance, and mutual benefit. Byzantine cultural influence was profound, visible in early Venetian art, architecture, and religious practices. The Doges often sought imperial recognition and titles, reinforcing their legitimacy. In the early centuries, Venice was undeniably a Byzantine dependency. It was a remote outpost on the empire's western frontier. However, as the Byzantine Empire weakened and its grip on Italy loosened, Venice's autonomy grew. The Crucible of 992, issued by Emperor Basil II, was a particularly significant milestone. It confirmed Venice's trading rights and reduced customs duties in Byzantine ports. This evolving relationship was characterized by a series of treaties and agreements known as pacta. These granted Venice increasing commercial privileges within the Byzantine Empire. Byzantium, facing threats from all sides, increasingly relied on Venice's growing naval power to protect its maritime interests and transport its goods. This effectively granted Venetian merchants a competitive advantage over their rivals. These concessions were not acts of imperial generosity, but strategic necessities. This symbiotic relationship, however, contained the seeds of future conflict. Venice's economic ambitions would eventually clash with Byzantine imperial authority. This was a constant irritant and a threat to their commercial lifeline. Doge Pietro II, or Ciolo, a visionary and energetic leader, understood that true maritime power required undisputed control of the Republic's immediate waters. The turn of the millennium marked a pivotal moment in Venice's assertion of dominance in the Adriatic Sea. For centuries, the Narentine pirates had plagued Venetian shipping. In the year 10,000 CE, he launched a decisive naval expedition against the Narentines and other Slavic tribes along the Dalmatian coast. This campaign was a resounding success. Venetian forces crushed the pirate strongholds, securing the Adriatic for Venetian trade. He returned to Venice a hero, having effectively established Venetian suzerainty over the eastern Adriatic coast. The expedition of 1000 CE was more than just a military victory. It was a political statement. Doge Pietro II, or Ciolo, received the homage of the Dalmatian cities, which sought Venetian protection from their unruly neighbours. From that point forward, the Doge of Venice also bore the title Doge of Dalmatia, a symbolic but significant assertion of territorial claim and maritime authority. This campaign solidified Venice's position as the undisputed mistress of the Adriatic. It was a crucial step in its transformation from a lagoon refuge to a formidable maritime power with regional influence. As the 11th century drew to a close, a new and formidable threat emerged in the Mediterranean, the Normans. His gaze turned naturally to Venice, whose naval capabilities had grown exponentially over the preceding centuries. These ambitious and aggressive warriors, having established a powerful kingdom in southern Italy and Sicily, began to cast their eyes eastward. They posed a direct challenge to the Byzantine Empire's remaining territories in the Balkans and Greece. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komneno found himself in a desperate situation. His empire's navy was in disarray, and he urgently needed a powerful maritime ally to counter the Norman threat. In 1081 CE, the Normans, led by Robert Guiscard, launched a major invasion of the Byzantine Empire. They besieged the strategically vital city of Dyrrhachium, modern-day Daris in Albania. Alexios I Komnenos appealed to Venice for assistance, recognizing that only the Venetian fleet could break the Norman blockade and secure the sea lanes. The Venetians, ever pragmatic, saw an unparalleled opportunity. They agreed to provide naval support, but at a price. This was not merely an act of loyalty to a distant suzerain. It was a calculated move to secure unprecedented commercial advantages. The Venetian fleet, demonstrating its growing prowess, engaged the Normans in a series of naval battles off Dyrrhachium. While the land campaign was a disaster for the Byzantines, the Venetian navy proved indispensable. It inflicted heavy losses on the Norman fleet and kept the sea lanes open. The culmination of this strategic alliance was the Golden Bull of F082, issued by Emperor Alexios I Komnenos. The Byzantines, deeply indebted, were compelled to grant Venice extraordinary concessions, far beyond anything previously imagined. This crucial assistance saved the Byzantine Empire from an even greater catastrophe. It highlighted Venice's indispensable role as a naval power. This imperial decree, though formally issued just outside the strict chronological bounds of this chapter, was the direct consequence of the events of 1081. This included exemption from all customs duties and taxes in virtually every port. They gained the right to establish their own quarters and docks in major cities like Constantinople. It marked the definitive end of Venice's subservient relationship with Byzantium. It granted Venetian merchants unparalleled trading privileges throughout the Byzantine Empire. They also secured freedom of movement for their ships and goods. These were privileges enjoyed by no other foreign power, effectively giving Venice a near monopoly on Byzantine trade. It transformed Venice from a semi-autonomous Byzantine dependency into an economic powerhouse. It became a dominant force in Mediterranean trade and a nascent maritime empire. The Golden Bull of 1082 was a watershed moment. It was the crowning achievement of centuries of patient development, strategic maneuvering, and relentless adaptation. From a desperate flight for survival, a republic had been forged, ready to claim its destiny on the world stage. The refugees who had once huddled in fear in the muddy lagoons had, through sheer ingenuity and an unwavering spirit, built a state that was now dictating terms to an ancient empire. The stage was set for Venice's golden age, a period of unprecedented expansion, wealth and influence that would see the Lion of St. Mark roar across the seas. The early settlements, initially isolated, slowly began to connect. Communication was vital for survival, and the waterways, once a barrier, became their highways. Small boats, propelled by oars and simple sails, plied the channels carrying news, goods and people between the islands. This constant movement fostered a sense of shared identity, a common purpose among the disparate communities. They were not just refugees, they were Venetians. The challenges of the environment forced innovation. Lacking stone and timber, they learned to build with what was available. Reeds, mud, and later timber, imported from the mainland, formed the basis of their early structures. They drove countless wooden piles into the soft, muddy ground to create stable foundations, a technique that would become a hallmark of Venetian architecture. Every building, every canal, every bridge was a testament to their engineering ingenuity and their determination to tame the lagoon. Their diet, initially meagre, diversified as they mastered fishing and shellfish gathering. The lagoon teemed with marine life, providing a sustainable food source. Salt production, however, remained their most valuable commodity. It was a simple process of evaporating seawater in shallow pans, but the demand for salt across Europe for preserving meat and fish made it incredibly lucrative. This early industry provided the capital needed for further development and trade. The early political system, with its elected tribunes, reflected the decentralized nature of the settlements. Each island or cluster of islands had its own leader, chosen by the local populace. Their presence on the mainland meant a permanent rupture with the Roman past and a greater reliance on the sea for survival and connection to the Byzantine world. This pushed the Venetians further into their watery embrace, solidifying their maritime identity. This democratic impulse, born of necessity and the absence of a strong central authority, would persist in various forms throughout the Republic's history, even as power became more concentrated in the hands of the patriciate. The threat of further barbarian invasions, particularly from the Lombards, continued to shape Venetian development. The Lombards, unlike the Huns, sought to settle and establish a kingdom in Italy. The need for a single military commander, capable of coordinating defense against both land-based invaders and sea-borne pirates, became paramount. The Doge was not a king, but a chief magistrate, elected for life, yet accountable to the people, and nominally to the Byzantine emperor. The election of the first Doge, while shrouded in some historical ambiguity, represented a crucial step towards a more unified and centralized leadership. The early doggers were often strong, even autocratic figures. They needed to be to impose order on a collection of fiercely independent communities. Their reigns were often turbulent, marked by internal feuds and external pressures. The assassination of some doggos, or their forced deposition, underscored the constant tension between ducal authority and the desire for communal liberty. This dynamic, though often violent, ultimately led to a more balanced and resilient political system. The strategic decision to move the ducal seats to the Rialto Islands was a turning point. The Rialto, with its deeper channels and more defensible position, offered superior protection. It also provided a more central location for trade and administration, allowing for the gradual amalgamation of the scattered island communities into a single coherent urban entity. This was the true genesis of the city of Venice. The Doge's palace became the seat of government, while the basilica housing the relics of St. Mark became the spiritual heart of the Republic. Together, they formed the nucleus of what would become one of the most magnificent urban centres in Europe. The construction of the first Doge's palace and the original basilica of St. Mark on the Rialto symbolised this new unity and ambition. These were not just functional buildings, they were statements of power and identity. The acquisition of St. Mark's relics was a masterstroke of political and religious propaganda. In an age of deep faith, possessing the body of an apostle conferred immense prestige and legitimacy. It gave Venice a unique spiritual foundation, distinguishing it from other Italian cities that looked to Rome or other saints. St. Mark became the protector of the Republic, his winged lion a potent symbol of its sovereignty and divine favour. This spiritual legitimacy was crucial for a state that lacked traditional territorial claims or a long-established noble lineage. Venice's power derived from its trade and its navy, but its identity was cemented by its unique relationship with St. Mark. The annual ceremony of Sposalizio del Mare, marriage of the sea, where the Doge cast a ring into the Adriatic, symbolised Venice's dominion over the sea and its divine blessing, a tradition deeply intertwined with the cult of St. Mark. Securing it from piracy was essential for the Republic's economic survival and its strategic ambitions. Each naval victory against the Narentines reinforced Venetian naval expertise and its growing reputation as a maritime power. The ongoing struggle against the Narentine pirates was not just about protecting trade, it was about asserting control over the Adriatic. The Adriatic was Venice's natural sphere of influence, its home sea. The homage paid by the Dalmatian cities to the Doge was a clear acknowledgement of Venetian supremacy in the region. This marked the formal beginning of Venice's territorial expansion beyond the lagoon, establishing its first overseas dependencies. The expedition of Doge Pietro II Orseolo in 1000 CE was the culmination of these efforts. It was a decisive campaign that effectively cleared the Adriatic of the most persistent pirate threats. The title Doge of Dalmatia was more than just an honorific. It signified Venice's commitment to maintaining order and protecting its commercial interests along the eastern Adriatic coast. It created a sphere of influence that would serve as a vital buffer and a source of resources for the burgeoning Republic. This strategic foresight laid the groundwork for Venice's future maritime empire. Economically, Venice's position at the crossroads of East and West was its greatest asset. The fall of the Western Roman Empire had disrupted traditional trade routes, but Venice, with its strong ties to the Byzantine East, was uniquely positioned to bridge the gap. Its merchants became the primary conduits for luxury goods flowing from Asia to Europe. This trade was not simply about exchange, it was about innovation. Venetian merchants developed sophisticated commercial instruments and practices. Bills of exchange, partnerships, and rudimentary forms of banking emerged to facilitate large-scale international trade. These innovations made Venice a financial hub, attracting merchants and capital from across Europe. The wealth generated by this trade was immense. It allowed Venice to invest in its infrastructure, building canals, docks, and warehouses. The aim was to prevent any single individual or faction from gaining absolute power, a lesson learned from the turbulent reigns of early doggers. It funded the construction of its formidable fleet, both merchant and military. It also supported a vibrant artisan class, producing goods that were both beautiful and functional. further enhancing Venice's reputation. The political evolution of Venice was a continuous process of adaptation and refinement. The early struggles between the Doge and powerful families led to the gradual establishment of a more complex system of checks and balances. Instead, more specialized councils emerged, drawing their members from the increasingly influential patrician families. This was a natural evolution as the Republic matured. The Concio, the General Assembly, gradually lost some of its direct power as the Republic grew in size and complexity. It became impractical to gather all free men for every decision. The rise of the patriciate, the wealthy merchant families who dominated trade and shipping, was a defining feature of Venetian society. These families formed a closed elite, intermarrying and consolidating their power. They saw themselves as the guardians of the Republic, their prosperity inextricably linked to its success. This system, though rigid, proved incredibly effective in navigating the complex political and economic currents of the medieval world. This aristocratic control, while seemingly undemocratic by modern standards, provided a remarkable degree of stability and continuity. Decisions were made by experienced merchants and diplomats, accustomed to long-term planning and shrewd negotiation. The relationship with Byzantium, while initially one of dependence, gradually shifted towards one of partnership, and then eventually rivalry. The Byzantines, in their desperation against the Normans, had inadvertently created a formidable competitor. The Golden Bull of Tentable was a testament to Venice's growing power, but it also sowed the seeds of future resentment within the Byzantine Empire. The privileges granted to Venice in the Golden Bull were unprecedented. They allowed Venetian merchants to operate with a distinct advantage over their Greek and other foreign rivals within the Byzantine Empire. This economic dominance would eventually lead to friction and, in later centuries, outright hostility. However, for the time being, the alliance was mutually beneficial. Venice provided the naval power that Byzantium desperately needed, while Byzantium provided the access to eastern markets that fueled Venice's wealth. This strategic partnership was a cornerstone of Venice's early success. The Norman threat, though primarily directed at Byzantium, also had implications for Venice. A strong Norman presence in the Adriatic would have challenged Venice's nascent control over the sea. By aiding Byzantium, Venice was also protecting its own strategic interests and securing its maritime dominance. These victories boosted Venetian morale and cemented their reputation as skilled seafarers and warriors. The naval battles off Dyrrhachium were a crucial test for the young Venetian fleet. They proved its mettle against a formidable enemy, demonstrating that Venice was capable of projecting power far beyond its lagoon. The Golden Bull of 1082 was not merely a piece of paper, it was a blueprint for Venice's future. It enshrined its commercial supremacy in the East, providing the legal framework for its vast mercantile empire. The story of Venice's birth is one of relentless adaptation. From the initial desperate flight to the lagoon, every challenge was met with ingenuity and collective effort. This economic foundation allowed Venice to invest further in its fleet, its infrastructure, and its unique urban development. The wealth generated flowed back into the city, funding magnificent public buildings, supporting a flourishing artistic scene, and attracting skilled artisans and labourers from across Europe. It allowed Venetian merchants to establish permanent trading posts or fondacci in key Byzantine cities, becoming vital nodes in the global trade network. The inhospitable environment forced them to become masters of the sea, to innovate in trade, and to forge a unique political system. They built a city where none should have existed, a testament to human will overcoming natural adversity. The mud and reeds of the lagoon became the foundations of a global power. The early Venetians were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They did not seek to expand vast land empires. Their conquests were of the sea, of trade routes, and of commercial dominance. Their strength lay in their ships, their financial acumen, and their unparalleled ability to navigate both literal and metaphorical waters. The lessons learned during these centuries, the importance of maritime power, the value of trade, the need for a stable and balanced government, would guide Venice for the next 1,000 years. This period, from the humble beginnings as refugee settlements to the signing of the Golden Bull, represents the foundational era of the Venetian Republic. It was a time of struggle, innovation, and the gradual forging of a distinct identity. The very act of survival in the lagoon instilled a deep sense of pragmatism and self-reliance in the Venetian character. They understood that their existence was precarious, dependent on their own efforts and their ability to adapt. The seeds of its future glory, and indeed its eventual challenges, were all sown in these formative centuries. The Lion of St. Mark, still a cub, was beginning to find its roar. This fostered a community spirit, a collective determination to overcome obstacles. The early Venetians were also skilled diplomats. They had to be, navigating the complex political landscape between the Byzantine Empire, the Frankish kingdom, and various Lombard duchies. They developed a unique architectural style, distinct from the Roman or Lombard traditions of the mainland. Their buildings were designed to cope with the challenges of the watery environment, built on wooden piles, often with ground floors designed to flood harmlessly. This practical approach to construction became an aesthetic in itself. The development of their unique legal system, particularly maritime law, was another crucial innovation. As a trading power, they needed clear rules for contracts, shipping, and dispute resolution. They learned to play one power against another, always seeking to protect their independence and commercial interests. Their ability to maintain neutrality, or at least a flexible alliance, allowed them to prosper even as larger empires clashed around them. This diplomatic dexterity would become another hallmark of the Republic, enabling it to survive for centuries amidst powerful neighbours. Venetian commercial law became highly respected and influential throughout the Mediterranean. This legal framework provided stability and predictability for merchants, encouraging trade and investment. It was a testament to their foresight and their understanding of the practical necessities of a thriving commercial enterprise. The lagoon also fostered a strong sense of community and shared destiny. Living in close proximity, dependent on each other for survival and prosperity, they developed a fierce loyalty to their city and its unique way of life. This communal bond was a powerful force in maintaining the Republic's cohesion. Even as social stratification emerged, with the rise of the patriciate, there remained a strong sense of civic identity that transcended class divisions. All Venetians, in their own way, contributed to the Republic's success and shared in its fortunes. The early Venetian navy was not just a military force, it was an extension of their commercial enterprise. Merchant ships were often armed and capable of defending themselves, blurring the lines between trade and warfare. This integrated approach to maritime power was highly effective. The arsenal, which would later become the largest industrial complex in Europe, had its humble beginnings in this period. Small shipyards on the Rialto Islands gradually expanded, building and maintaining the vessels that were the lifeblood of the Republic. This early investment in naval infrastructure was critical. The Doge, as the symbolic head of both the state and the church, played a crucial role in unifying the Republic. While his power was increasingly constrained by councils, his ceremonial role remained immensely important, embodying the continuity and majesty of Venice. The early doggers also understood the importance of public works. They oversaw the dredging of canals, the construction of bridges, and the improvement of port facilities. These investments in infrastructure were essential for facilitating trade and improving the quality of life in the lagoon. The Republic's early history is a story of constant growth and adaptation. Each challenge, whether from barbarian invaders, pirates, or the unforgiving environment, was met with a practical and innovative response. The Golden Bull of 1082 had thrown open the gates of the East. It was a charter not just of privilege, but of destiny. For the Venetians, who had clawed their way from the mudflats of the lagoon to mastery of the Adriatic, this was the moment to truly unfurl their sails. The humble salt traders and fishermen were now poised to become the undisputed lords of Mediterranean commerce, their ships carrying the wealth of empires, their city transforming into a glittering jewel of unparalleled opulence. This was the dawn of Venice's golden age, a period of breathtaking expansion, fierce rivalry, and the forging of an empire built not on land, but on the boundless, shimmering sea. With the Byzantine Empire's markets virtually at their feet, Venetian merchants wasted no time. Their ships, increasingly larger and more robust, became ubiquitous in the ports of Constantinople, Alexandria, and the Levant. They transported spices from the distant east, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, that were worth their weight in gold in medieval Europe. Silks, precious stones, exotic perfumes, and intricate tapestries flowed into Venice, transforming its markets into bustling hubs of international exchange. In return, they supplied the East with timber, iron, and slaves from the Slavic lands, commodities essential for the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. This burgeoning trade fueled immense wealth, which in turn funded further expansion. The arsenal, Venice's famed shipyard, began its transformation into the most advanced industrial complex of its age. Here, under the watchful eye of the Republic, thousands of skilled workers laboured to produce ships with astonishing speed and efficiency. Galleys, the backbone of both their merchant and military fleets, were built on an assembly line principle centuries before its time, a testament to Venetian organisational genius. These ships were not just vessels, they were the arteries of their empire, carrying goods, soldiers, and the very essence of Venetian power across the waves. The Crusades, those epic religious wars that convulsed Europe from the late 11th century onwards, presented Venice with both challenges and unprecedented opportunities. While other European powers were driven primarily by religious fervour, Venice, ever pragmatic, saw them through the lens of commerce and strategic advantage. They offered their naval expertise and transport capabilities to Crusader armies, but always at a steep price, securing lucrative contracts and invaluable trading concessions in the newly conquered territories of the Holy Land. The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099, saw Venetian ships playing a vital role in besieging coastal cities like Tyre and Acre, which then became crucial Venetian trading outposts. They established their own quarters, complete with churches, warehouses, and legal jurisdiction within these Latin Crusader states. This network of trading colonies, or fondaci, stretched across the Mediterranean, forming the backbone of their maritime empire. Each fondaci was a miniature Venice, a bastion of Venetian law and commerce in foreign lands. The most infamous and arguably most pivotal event for Venice during the Crusades was the Fourth Crusade, 1202–1204. Originally intended to recapture Jerusalem, this crusade was infamously diverted to Constantinople, the capital of the very Byzantine Empire that had once been Venice's patron. Doge Enrico Dandolo, a shrewd and formidable nonagenarian, played a central role in this diversion. The Crusaders, unable to pay Venice for their transport, agreed to help Venice recapture the rebellious city of Zara, Zadar, on the Dalmatian coast, a Venetian possession. From Zara, the crusade took an even more dramatic turn. Egged on by Dandolo and internal Byzantine political intrigues, the Crusaders, with crucial Venetian naval support, besieged and ultimately sacked Constantinople in 1204. The plunder was immense, and Venice claimed the lion's share. They took vast quantities of relics, art, including the famous bronze horses that now adorn St. Mark's Basilica. The sack of Constantinople was a geopolitical earthquake. It shattered the Byzantine Empire into fragments and allowed Venice to establish direct control over a vast swathe of its former territories. Venice acquired key islands in the Aegean, like Crete and Euboea, numerous ports along the Greek coast, and 3/8 of Constantinople itself, including vital harbour facilities. This was not just commercial dominance, it was territorial empire building on an unprecedented scale, transforming Venice into the dominante, the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean. This expansion, however, brought Venice into direct conflict with its greatest rival, Genoa. Both republics were maritime powers, fiercely competitive and driven by similar commercial ambitions. The 13th and 14th centuries were dominated by a series of brutal and protracted conflicts known as the Genoese Wars. These were not mere skirmishes, but full-scale naval campaigns, fought across the Mediterranean from the Black Sea to the Atlantic. The First Genoese War, 1256–1270, saw both sides suffer heavy losses, but Venice generally held the upper hand. The Second Genoese War, or War of Curzela, 1294–1299, was more devastating for Venice, culminating in a major defeat at the Battle of Curzela, where Marco Polo was captured. Despite this, Venice quickly recovered, demonstrating its resilience. The most critical of these conflicts was the War of Chioggia, 1378–1381. Genoa, allied with Hungary and Padua, launched a devastating attack that brought Venice to the brink of collapse. The Genoese fleet captured Chioggia, a strategic town at the southern end of the lagoon, threatening Venice itself. The situation was dire, but the Venetians, rallying under Doge Andrea Contarini, showed extraordinary resolve. Through immense effort and sacrifice, Venice managed to turn the tide. They blockaded the Genoese fleet in Chioggia, and in a desperate naval engagement, forced their surrender. The War of Chioggia was a near-death experience, but Venice emerged victorious, albeit exhausted. This victory cemented Venice's naval supremacy in the Adriatic and significantly weakened Genoa's power, though their rivalry would simmer for decades more. While expanding its empire and fighting its rivals, Venice also refined its unique political system. The early, somewhat chaotic popular assemblies were gradually replaced by more structured and aristocratic bodies. The Serrata del Maggior Consiglio, closing of the Great Council in 1297, was a pivotal moment. It effectively codified the membership of the Great Council, the Republic's main legislative body, to a closed circle of patrician families. This act, while controversial at the time, brought stability to Venetian politics. It ensured that power remained in the hands of a hereditary elite who were deeply invested in the Republic's commercial success. While seemingly undemocratic, this system prevented internal strife and allowed for long-term strategic planning, a key factor in Venice's enduring power. The Doge, though still the ceremonial head of state, saw his executive power increasingly curtailed by various councils. The most powerful of these was the Council of Ten, established in 1310, initially as a temporary body to deal with a conspiracy, but later made permanent. This council became the Republic's supreme security and intelligence body, wielding immense power in matters of state security and internal order. Other important bodies included the Senate, responsible for foreign policy and commercial affairs, and the College, the executive arm of the government. This intricate web of councils, with overlapping responsibilities and internal checks and balances, was designed to prevent any single individual or group from accumulating too much power, ensuring the stability and continuity of the Republic. It was a masterpiece of political engineering. The wealth pouring into Venice from its vast trade network fueled an explosion of artistic and architectural development. The Basilica of St. Mark, initially a modest ducal chapel, was continuously embellished with Byzantine mosaics, precious marbles, and the spoils of Constantinople, transforming it into a dazzling symbol of Venetian wealth and piety. The Doge's palace, too, evolved from a fortress into a magnificent Gothic masterpiece, reflecting the Republic's power and sophistication. Venetian artists, influenced by both Byzantine and Western traditions, developed a distinct style characterized by vibrant colors, rich ornamentation, and a focus on maritime themes. The city itself became a work of art, with its intricate network of canals, bridges, and palazzi reflecting the unique challenges and opportunities of its watery environment. Venice became a magnet for artists, architects, and scholars from across Europe. Education and learning also flourished. The Venetians, pragmatic as ever, focused on subjects relevant to their commercial and maritime endeavours: mathematics, navigation, cartography, and foreign languages. They established schools for merchants and mariners, ensuring a steady supply of skilled professionals to manage their vast empire. The printing press, introduced in the late 15th century, found a fertile ground in Venice, which became a major centre for book production and dissemination. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe in the mid-14th century, also struck Venice with devastating force. The crowded, interconnected nature of the city, a hub of international trade, made it particularly vulnerable. The plague caused immense loss of life, disrupting commerce and society. However, Venice, with its resilient spirit and sophisticated public health measures, including pioneering quarantine practices, managed to recover more quickly than many other European cities, demonstrating its enduring strength. As the 15th century progressed, Venice began to expand its territorial possessions on the Italian mainland, the terra firma. This was a strategic shift, driven by the need to secure food supplies, protect trade routes from land-based threats, and counter the growing power of neighbouring Italian states like Milan and Florence. The acquisition of cities like Padua, Verona, and Vicenza provided Venice with fertile agricultural lands and a strategic buffer against potential invaders. This expansion, while adding to Venice's power and resources, also fundamentally changed its character. It transformed the purely maritime republic into a hybrid state, balancing its traditional sea-based empire with a growing land empire, a duality that would present new challenges in the centuries to come. The mid-15th century brought a new and formidable power onto the world stage, the Ottoman Turks. Having steadily expanded their empire in Anatolia and the Balkans, they set their sights on Constantinople, the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire. The fall of Constantinople to Sultan Mehmed II in 1453 was a seismic event that sent shockwaves across Europe. For Venice, it was a moment of profound significance. The city that had once been their most important trading partner, and at times their rival, was now in the hands of a powerful and expansionist Islamic empire. This event marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new, more dangerous chapter for the Venetian Republic. The fall of Constantinople signaled the definitive shift in the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Venice, which had built its empire on its privileged access to the east via Constantinople, now faced a direct and existential threat to its commercial and territorial interests. The golden age of unchallenged expansion was over. From this point forward, Venice would be locked in a centuries-long struggle with the Ottoman Empire, a conflict that would drain its resources, test its resilience, and ultimately shape its destiny. The era of the unchallenged Lion of the Lagoon, dominant and expanding, had reached its zenith. A new age of defense, adaptation, and fierce competition was about to begin. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was more than just the end of an ancient empire. It was a thunderclap that echoed across the Mediterranean. For Venice, the news was received with a mixture of dread and grim determination. The city that had been their gateway to the east, their most vital trading partner, was now the capital of a new formidable power, the Ottoman Empire. The era of unchallenged Venetian dominance was over. A new age of struggle, of desperate defense, and of a relentless battle for survival against a rising tide of Ottoman expansion had begun. Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, was not content with his prize. His ambitions stretched across the seas, directly threatening Venice's vast maritime empire. The Ottomans, a land-based power with an insatiable drive for expansion, quickly understood the strategic importance of naval might. They began to build a formidable fleet, investing heavily in shipyards and naval technology, directly challenging Venice's traditional supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean. The stage was set for a protracted, brutal contest between the Lion of St. Mark and the Crescent, a clash of civilizations and commercial interests that would define the next 2 centuries. The first major conflict, the First Ottoman-Venetian War 1463 to 1479, erupted over control of the Morea, Peloponnese in Greece and Venetian trading posts. This was a brutal and costly war for Venice, draining its treasury and manpower. The Republic found itself fighting on multiple fronts, stretched thin defending its scattered island possessions and mainland territories. Despite some notable naval victories where Venetian galleys proved their mettle, the Ottomans' relentless land advances and their sheer numerical superiority proved difficult to counter. Venice was forced to cede significant territories, including its long-held island of Negroponte, Euboea, a severe blow to its prestige and commercial network, as it was a vital link in their Aegean trade routes. This war established a pattern that would define the next 2 centuries, a series of conflicts where Venice, despite its superior naval tactics and the quality of its fighting men, struggled to contain the vast resources and military might of the Ottoman Empire. Each war chipped away at Venice's overseas possessions, forcing the Republic to make painful concessions in treaties. Yet Venice never fully surrendered its ambition or its role as a major European power, consistently rebuilding its fleet and re-engaging in conflict. The discovery of new sea routes to Asia by the Portuguese around the Cape of Good Hope in the late 15th century added another layer of challenge, perhaps more insidious than the Ottoman military threat. This momentous shift in global trade routes threatened Venice's traditional role as the intermediary between East and West. Spices, silks, and other valuable goods could now bypass the Mediterranean entirely, reaching European markets directly via the Atlantic. This new maritime highway meant that Lisbon, not Venice, became the primary European entrepot for these highly coveted goods. Venice, ever pragmatic and adaptable, tried to adapt to this seismic economic shift. They explored new trade opportunities in the Mediterranean and North Africa, invested in manufacturing, particularly textiles and glass, and continued to dominate the intra-Mediterranean trade that remained. They also attempted, with limited success, to collaborate with Egyptian Mamluks to disrupt Portuguese routes. However, the long-term impact of these new routes was undeniable. It gradually eroded Venice's commercial monopoly, forcing it to compete on a new global stage where its geographical advantage was diminished. The city's wealth, while still immense and visible in its opulent architecture, would no longer grow at the explosive rates of its golden age, leading to a slow but steady relative economic decline. Despite these immense external pressures, a relentless military threat from the east and a fundamental shift in global trade, Venice remained a beacon of political stability in a turbulent Europe. While other states were plagued by devastating religious wars like the Reformation, dynastic struggles and internal rebellions, Venice's unique republican system, with its intricate checks and balances, ensured remarkable continuity. The patrician class, though sometimes internally divided by family rivalries, presented a united front to the world, prioritizing the republic's survival and commercial interests above all else. The Council of Ten, initially a temporary body, had become a permanent and powerful institution. It continued to act as the republic's vigilant guardian, rooting out conspiracies, maintaining internal order with ruthless efficiency, and overseeing intelligence gathering. Its secret nature and swift justice were legendary. The Doge, while a figurehead stripped of much executive power, still embodied the majesty and continuity of the state, serving as a unifying symbol. This political stability allowed Venice to focus its precious resources and diplomatic efforts on external threats rather than being consumed by internal strife that crippled many of its European counterparts. The early 16th century saw Venice embroiled in the League of Cambrai, 1508 to 1516, a formidable alliance of nearly every major European power, including France, the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and the Papacy, united against Venice's growing power on the Italian mainland. This was a land war, a sphere where Venice, primarily a naval power, found itself at a distinct disadvantage against the massive armies of its adversaries. The League members sought to dismember Venice's terra firma mainland empire, which they viewed as an illegitimate expansion. The Battle of Agnadello in 1509 was a catastrophic defeat for Venice, leading to the loss of almost all its terra firma possessions and seemingly marking the end of its mainland ambitions. It was another near-death experience for the Republic, arguably more perilous than the War of Chioggia. However, through a combination of brilliant diplomacy, the fracturing of the League as its members began to distrust each other, and the surprising loyalty of its mainland subjects who preferred Venetian rule to that of foreign invaders, Venice managed to recover much of its lost territory within a few years. This conflict highlighted the dangers of overextending its land empire and underscored the fundamental importance of its maritime strength and diplomatic agility. The struggle with the Ottomans continued relentlessly, with periods of uneasy peace punctuated by renewed warfare. The Second Ottoman-Venetian War, 1499 to 1503, saw further losses for Venice, including important fortresses in Greece and ports in Dalmatia. Critically, the Ottomans were rapidly mastering naval warfare, and their galleys increasingly challenged Venetian control of the seas, forcing Venice to constantly invest in its fleet and adapt its naval strategies. The most famous and tragic conflict of this era was the War for Cyprus, 1570-1573. Cyprus, a wealthy Venetian possession and a strategic outpost in the eastern Mediterranean, was a prime target for the Ottomans. Despite a heroic defense, particularly the prolonged and brutal siege of Famagusta, the island ultimately fell. The brutality of the Ottoman conquest, including the horrific flaying alive of the Venetian commander Marcantonio Bragadin, shocked Christian Europe and galvanized a response. However, the war also saw a moment of unparalleled triumph for Christian forces. In 1571, a Holy League, primarily composed of Venice, Spain, and the Papal States, assembled a massive fleet, the largest Christian armada ever seen, at the Battle of Lepanto off the coast of Greece. This combined fleet inflicted a crushing defeat on the Ottoman navy. It was a resounding victory, sinking or capturing hundreds of Ottoman ships and shattering the myth of Ottoman invincibility at sea. This provided a much-needed morale boost for Europe and temporarily checked Ottoman naval expansion. For Venice, Lepanto was a Pyrrhic victory. While it demonstrated the enduring power and skill of its fleet and its allies, it did not lead to the recovery of Cyprus. The Republic, exhausted by the immense cost in ships and men, and ever pragmatic, signed a separate peace treaty with the Ottomans in 1573, acknowledging the permanent loss of the island. This underscored the harsh reality that even a decisive military victory could not fully reverse the tide of Ottoman expansion, given the vast demographic and economic resources of the Ottoman Empire. Despite the constant warfare, the shifting economic landscape, and the immense financial strain, the 16th and 17th centuries were periods of extraordinary cultural flourishing in Venice. The city became a vibrant centre of the High Renaissance and Mannerism, attracting artists of immense talent like Titian, Tintoretto and Veronese, whose masterpieces adorned its churches, scuole, confraternities and palazzi, reflecting the Republic's wealth and piety. Venetian music, particularly the innovative polyphony of the Venetian school and the birth of opera, also reached new heights with composers like Claudio Monteverdi and Giovanni Gabrieli, whose works profoundly influenced European music. The printing industry, established in the previous century, continued to thrive, making Venice a leading European centre for book production and intellectual exchange. Its presses produced everything from classical texts to scientific treatises, making it a hub of learning. The city's unique beauty, its intricate network of canals, its distinctive architecture, and its vibrant social life, particularly the famed carnival, made it a magnet for travellers, diplomats, and intellectuals from across the continent. Venice remained a symbol of sophistication, luxury, and artistic innovation, a cultural capital even as its political and economic power slowly waned. The last major conflict of this period was the Cretan War, 1645 to 1669, also known as the War of Candia, after the capital city of Crete. This was the longest and most devastating Ottoman-Venetian war, a brutal 24-year struggle for control of Venice's last major Aegean possession. The war was characterized by a massive naval blockade of the Dardanelles by the Venetian fleet, aimed at cutting off Ottoman supply lines, and a relentless land campaign on Crete. The siege of Candia itself lasted for an astonishing 21 years, from 1648 to 1669, making it one of the longest sieges in recorded history. Venice poured immense resources into its defense, demonstrating incredible resilience and sacrifice, with thousands of Venetian and mercenary soldiers dying in the trenches. European volunteers flocked to aid the Venetians, recognizing the strategic importance of holding back the Ottoman tide in the Mediterranean. Despite heroic efforts and heavy losses on both sides, Crete ultimately fell to the Ottomans in 1669. The loss of Crete was a profound blow, marking the definitive end of Venice's extensive maritime empire in the Aegean. It was a clear indication that Venice, while still formidable and capable of immense sacrifice, could no longer sustain a large-scale territorial empire against the overwhelming might and demographic resources of the Ottomans. The Republic was exhausted, its treasury depleted, and its population diminished by centuries of conflict. The conclusion of the Cretan War left Venice exhausted but not broken. The Republic still controlled a significant portion of the Adriatic, including Dalmatia and the Ionian Islands, and its commercial network, though diminished, continued to operate. Its political stability remained intact, and its cultural influence continued to shine, even as its military and economic might receded from the forefront of European power. The final act of this long struggle against the Ottomans came with the Marian War, 1684 to 1699. Venice, seizing an opportunity presented by the Ottoman Empire's involvement in a wider European conflict, the Great Turkish War, which saw the Ottomans fighting Austria and Poland, launched a daring offensive to reclaim lost territories in Greece. This was a moment of strategic opportunism for the Republic. Under the brilliant command of Francesco Morosini, a doge who earned the epithet Peloponnesiacus for his campaigns, Venice achieved remarkable successes. They reconquered the entire Peloponnese, Mura, captured Athens, though inadvertently damaging the Parthenon in the process, and secured several islands. It was a final, glorious burst of military prowess for the Republic, demonstrating that the Lion of St. Mark could still bite fiercely when given the chance. The Mauryan War concluded with the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. This treaty formally recognized Venice's gains in the Morea and Dalmatia, marking a significant, albeit temporary, reversal of Ottoman expansion in the Balkans. For Venice, it was a moment of triumph, regaining lost prestige and territory after centuries of losses. However, the Treaty of Karlowitz also marked a definitive turning point. While a victory, it was the last major territorial gain for Venice. The Republic, though still a respected power, was increasingly overshadowed by the rising nation-states of Europe, with their larger armies, centralized administrations, and burgeoning colonial empires. Its military and economic resources, strained by centuries of relentless conflict, were showing their limits. The age of the great Ottoman-Venetian wars was effectively over, and with it, Venice's role as a primary military and economic power in Europe. Venice had survived, resilient and proud, but the global stage was shifting, and its role within it was destined to change from a dominant empire to a respected but declining cultural and diplomatic force. The Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, while a hard-won victory for Venice, marked a subtle but profound shift. The triumphant roar of the Lion of St. Mark, once a thunder that resonated across the Mediterranean, was now a fading echo. The great draining wars with the Ottoman Empire had largely concluded, but they had left Venice exhausted, its once overflowing treasury severely depleted, and its population diminished by centuries of conflict and plague. The 18th century dawned not with the promise of new conquests or vibrant expansion, but with the quiet, inexorable reality of a slow, relative decline. Europe itself was undergoing a dramatic transformation. New, powerful nation-states like the centralized monarchies of France, the burgeoning maritime empire of Great Britain, and the vast land-based power of Austria were rising to prominence. Their highly organized governments, professional standing armies, and expanding colonial ambitions fundamentally overshadowed Venice's traditional model of a city-state maritime republic. The very scale of international politics had outgrown Venice's capacity. Crucially, global trade routes had definitively shifted. The Age of Discovery, initiated centuries prior, now saw the Atlantic Ocean, not the Mediterranean Sea, as the primary highway for the most lucrative commerce. Ships laden with goods from the Americas and Asia bypassed Venice entirely, sailing directly to the burgeoning ports of Lisbon, Amsterdam, London, and Bordeaux. Venice, once the indispensable bridge between East and West, found its commercial role increasingly marginalized, its ancient monopolies eroded by new economic realities. The Republic's ancient political system, once a source of remarkable stability and a marvel of intricate checks and balances, now became a symbol of its rigidity and inability to adapt. The patrician class, the hereditary elite that had governed Venice for centuries, grew increasingly insular and resistant to any form of meaningful change. They clung fiercely to tradition and their inherited privileges, wary of any reforms that might upset the delicate balance of power, dilute their exclusive control, or threaten their deeply entrenched interests. This deep-seated conservatism, while preventing the violent internal strife that plagued other European states, also stifled innovation, prevented necessary adaptation, and ultimately led to a slow ossification of the state. The Doge, though still the ceremonial head of state, presiding over elaborate rituals and grand processions, possessed little real executive power. His role was largely symbolic, a living embodiment of the Republic's continuity. The various councils, particularly the powerful Council of Ten and the Venerable Senate, continued to manage the Republic's affairs. However, their deliberations often became bogged down in bureaucratic inertia, endless debates, and a cautious approach that made them unable to respond swiftly or decisively to the rapidly evolving and aggressive geopolitical landscape of 18th century Europe. Decision-making was slow, fragmented, and often reactive. Venice's military power, once formidable, and the envy of the Mediterranean, continued to wane in both scale and technological advancement. While its famed arsenal could still produce ships of impressive quality, the sheer scale of the navies of Britain or France, with their vast resources and larger populations, dwarfed Venice's capabilities. Its small, largely mercenary land army was no match for the professional, disciplined forces of the great European powers. The Republic increasingly relied on a precarious policy of diplomacy and strict neutrality to protect its remaining territories and its fragile independence, a strategy that would prove increasingly fragile and ultimately unsustainable in an age of aggressive expansionism and revolutionary fervor. Economically, Venice diversified its industries in an attempt to compensate for the decline in long-distance trade, but these efforts were insufficient to reverse the long-term trends. Manufacturing, particularly of exquisite luxury goods like Murano glass, fine silks, intricate lace and high-quality printed books, continued to thrive, catering to Europe's elite and the burgeoning Grand Tour market. Venice also remained a significant centre for banking and finance, its financial institutions still respected. However, the sheer volume of high-value trade that had once defined its immense wealth had irrevocably shifted. The city became more reliant on its terra firma possessions for agricultural produce and consistent revenue, tying its fate more closely to the volatile Italian mainland. Paradoxically, as Venice's political and economic power receded from the forefront of European affairs, its cultural influence reached a new zenith. The 18th century was the Republic's last great artistic flourish, an era of unparalleled beauty, intellectual vibrancy, and sophisticated hedonism. The city became the ultimate playground of Europe, a mandatory destination for aristocrats, artists, intellectuals, and adventurers seeking pleasure, enlightenment, and the unique charm of a city unlike any other. Venetian art of this period, often termed the Rococo, was characterized by its lightness, elegance, and vibrant luminous colors, a stark contrast to the more somber tones of earlier periods. Artists like Giovanni Battista Tiepolo adorned palaces and churches with breathtaking illusionistic frescoes, creating vast ethereal heavens on ceilings. Canaletto and Francesco Guardi captured the city's unique charm and atmospheric light in their exquisite veduti, detailed cityscapes, which became immensely popular souvenirs for wealthy travelers on the Grand Tour, preserving Venice's image for posterity. Their works offered a window into the city's unique blend of daily life and timeless grandeur. Venetian music also thrived, reaching an apex of creativity. Antonio Vivaldi, the Red Priest, composed his brilliant concertos, including the iconic Four Seasons, and numerous operas often performed in the city's numerous ospedali, orphanages, and conservatories, which were renowned for their musical training. Opera houses flourished, drawing audiences from across Europe for extravagant productions and elaborate stage designs. Venice was a city where music filled the air, from the grand theatres of San Cassiano and La Fenice to the intimate salons and the serenades of gondolas gliding through the canals, creating an immersive auditory experience. The famed Venetian Carnival reached its absolute peak in the 18th century. It was a period of unrestrained festivity, lasting for months, where masks allowed for anonymity, social boundaries blurred, and a sense of playful transgression permeated the city. Gambling dens, lavish masquerade balls, and theatrical performances filled every corner of Venice, creating an atmosphere of joyous abandon and elaborate illusion. This dazzling cultural effervescence, however, masked a deeper sense of political and economic decline, serving as a final brilliant sunset before the inevitable night. It was a grand party on the eve of dissolution. The Republic's cherished neutrality, a cornerstone of its foreign policy for centuries, became increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of revolutionary upheaval. As the French Revolution ignited Europe in the late 18th century, unleashing new ideologies and unprecedented military power, the old order began to crumble with terrifying speed. Venice, with its ancient republican system and its deep-seated aristocratic conservatism, found itself caught precariously between the revolutionary fervour of Republican France and the conservative monarchies of Austria, both of whom viewed Italy as a strategic prize. Napoleon Bonaparte, a rising star in the French military, swept through Italy with his revolutionary armies, demonstrating a new kind of warfare characterized by speed, aggression, and overwhelming force. His campaigns were swift and decisive, systematically dismantling the old Italian states and reshaping the political map. Venice, with its aging fleet, its small and outdated army, and its deep-seated aversion to military innovation, was utterly ill-prepared to resist such a formidable force. Its policy of strict neutrality, once its strength in balancing powers, now became its fatal weakness, as it left the Republic isolated, without powerful allies, and vulnerable to the ambitions of a ruthless conqueror. The internal divisions within Venice, though usually suppressed by the powerful state apparatus, began to surface under this immense external pressure. Some patricians, clinging to the Republic's ancient dignity, favoured a desperate resistance, however futile. Others, more pragmatic or fearful, advocated for accommodation with Napoleon. Meanwhile, the common people, long excluded from power and burdened by economic hardship, watched with a mixture of apathy, simmering discontent, and even a degree of hope for change. The Republic, proud of its 1,000-year independence, found itself paralyzed by indecision and fractured by conflicting interests, unable to forge a united front. In April 1797, Napoleon, having conquered much of northern Italy and established the Cisalpine Republic on Venice's doorstep, issued a blunt ultimatum to the ancient Republic. He accused Venice of hostile acts, including alleged massacres of French soldiers, and demanded its immediate surrender and the dissolution of its government. The Great Council, faced with overwhelming military might, the threat of invasion, and profound internal disunity, made the agonizing decision to vote for its own dissolution, ending a millennium of self-rule. On May 12, 1797, the last Doge, Ludovico Manin, a figure of profound sadness and resignation, formally abdicated his office. In a poignant and symbolic act, the Golden Book, which listed the names of the patrician families eligible for governance, was ceremonially burned in St. Mark's Square, irrevocably symbolizing the end of the aristocratic republic and its exclusive lineage. The majestic bronze lion of St. Mark, which had watched over Venice for centuries from its column, was pulled down from its standard in the piazza, replaced by the revolutionary Tree of Liberty, the stark symbol of the French Revolution's triumph. The fall of Venice was not a dramatic military defeat in a grand, climactic battle, but a quiet, almost resigned capitulation, a whimper rather than a bang. It was an end brought about by a complex combination of overwhelming external military pressure, profound internal paralysis and division, and the fundamental inability of an ancient system to adapt to a rapidly accelerating New World Order. The Republic, which had defied empires and navigated centuries of change with unparalleled resilience, finally succumbed to the revolutionary tide that swept away the old regimes of Europe. The Treaty of Campo Formio, signed in October 1797 between France and Austria, sealed Venice's tragic fate. Napoleon, ever the pragmatist and a master of realpolitik, callously ceded Venice and its terra firma territories to Austria, effectively using the ancient republic as a mere bargaining chip in his grand strategic game for continental dominance. The city that had once been the undisputed mistress of the seas, dictating terms to emperors, was now merely a pawn, traded between two powerful empires without its consent. The end of the Venetian Republic marked the close of a truly remarkable chapter in human history. Over 1,000 years of continuous independence, a unique political system, and an unparalleled maritime empire had come to an end. The city itself, however, remained, its extraordinary beauty and its indomitable spirit enduring even as its political independence vanished. The twilight had fallen on the Republic, but the echoes of the Lion of the Lagoon would resonate through history, continuing to captivate and inspire for centuries to come. The Tree of Liberty, planted in St. Mark's Square, was a stark, alien symbol. It replaced the lion, the ancient emblem of Venetian sovereignty. On that fateful day in May 1797, the 1,000-year-old republic had ceased to exist. Its fall was not a sudden collapse, but the quiet, almost imperceptible fading of a once brilliant star. The city, however, remained, its stones and canals bearing silent witness to a glorious past, now subjected to the whims of new masters. The immediate aftermath of the Republic's dissolution was a period of profound uncertainty and upheaval for Venice. Napoleon, having so casually disposed of the Republic, then just as casually handed it over to Austria in the Treaty of Campo Formio. This transfer of power was a bitter pill for Venetians, who had prided themselves on their unique, unbroken independence for over a millennium. The city, once a proud sovereign state and a dominant maritime power, was now merely a province within the vast, multi-ethnic Habsburg Empire, its destiny no longer its own. Austrian rule, though initially bringing a degree of administrative order after the revolutionary chaos, was often seen as heavy-handed and overtly bureaucratic by the Venetians. They were accustomed to their unique republican liberties and the intricate, if slow, processes of their own government. They chafed deeply under a foreign administration that imposed different laws, taxes, and a centralized system that offered little local representation or autonomy. The city's economy, already in decline due to shifting trade routes and centuries of warfare, struggled further under new trade policies and administrative structures that explicitly favored Vienna and other imperial centers, often at Venice's expense. Many patrician families, their power and wealth stripped away with the end of the Republic, faced ruin, their ancient palaces becoming symbols of a lost era. Napoleon's influence, however, was not entirely gone from the Italian peninsula. He briefly re-established French control over Venice in 1805, incorporating it into his newly formed Kingdom of Italy. This period saw some modernizing reforms, often imposed with a heavy hand, including the suppression of many ancient monasteries and religious confraternities, which held significant wealth and social influence. New public works were initiated, such as the creation of the royal gardens and the demolition of some old structures to create more open spaces. Yet, despite these changes, it was still foreign rule, and the city remained a pawn in the larger European power struggles, its fate decided in distant capitals by forces far beyond its control. After Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo and the subsequent Congress of Vienna, Venice reverted to Austrian rule in 1815, becoming part of the newly created Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia. This second, longer period of Austrian domination was characterized by continued economic stagnation as the city struggled to regain its former commercial vibrancy. More significantly, it fostered a growing sense of Italian nationalism across the peninsula. Secret societies like the Carbonari and various revolutionary movements began to stir beneath the surface, dreaming of a unified Italy free from foreign control, a sentiment that resonated deeply with Venetians who longed for their lost autonomy. In 1848, during the widespread revolutionary fervour known as the Springtime of Nations, Venice briefly rekindled its republican spirit. Under the charismatic and determined leadership of Daniele Manin, a prominent lawyer though no relation to the last Doge, the Venetians rose up against Austrian rule and in a wave of patriotic enthusiasm re-established the Republic of San Marco. It was a heroic but ultimately doomed effort, lasting only 17 months. The city, isolated and outmatched, faced a brutal siege by superior Austrian forces, enduring bombardment and blockade. The courageous defense, marked by civilian resilience and a desperate struggle, underscored the enduring spirit of its people and their deep-seated desire for self-determination, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Finally, in 1866, as a direct result of the Third Italian War of Independence, in which Italy allied with Prussia against Austria, and the Austro-Prussian War, Venice was ceded by Austria to the newly formed Kingdom of Italy. After over 1,000 years of continuous independence and nearly 7 decades of various foreign rules, Venice became an integral part of a unified Italian nation. This marked the definitive end of its political saga as a distinct entity on the European stage, transforming it from a sovereign power into a celebrated yet provincially governed city. Despite the profound loss of its political independence, Venice's legacy endured, etched into the very fabric of European and global history. Its unique political system, a sophisticated republic in an age overwhelmingly dominated by monarchies and empires, served as a powerful model and an inspiration for later political thinkers and nascent democracies. The intricate system of checks and balances, the separation of powers, and the mechanisms designed to prevent tyranny and ensure stability were meticulously studied by philosophers like Montesquieu and even influenced the framers of the American Constitution, demonstrating its enduring intellectual impact. Commercially, Venice's influence was profound and far-reaching. It pioneered sophisticated financial instruments that became standard practices in international trade across Europe and beyond. Bills of exchange facilitated long-distance transactions without the need for physical currency, while maritime insurance mitigated the risks of perilous sea voyages. The adoption of double-entry bookkeeping, a Venetian innovation, revolutionized accounting practices. Its vast network of trading posts, its mastery of logistics, and its innovative commercial laws laid the groundwork for modern global commerce. The Venetian merchant, shrewd, adaptable, and profoundly cosmopolitan, became an archetype of entrepreneurial success. Architecturally, Venice remains an unparalleled marvel. Its unique urban landscape, built entirely on water, is a breathtaking testament to human ingenuity, engineering prowess, and sheer perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable natural obstacles. The Doge's Palace, a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, St. Mark's Basilica, with its dazzling mosaics, and countless other churches, scuole and palazzi, stand as magnificent monuments to its immense wealth, artistic vision, and the Republic's enduring power. The city itself is a living museum, a continuous organic masterpiece of urban planning and aesthetic harmony, drawing millions to witness its unique beauty. Artistically, Venice's contribution to the Renaissance and subsequent periods was immense and distinctive. From the vibrant, light-filled colours and sensuous forms of Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese who defined the Venetian school of painting, to the evocative cityscapes vedute of Canaletto and Francesco Guardi that captured the city's unique atmospheric light, Venetian art left an indelible mark on European painting. Its innovations in music, particularly the development of polyphony and the birth of opera with composers like Claudio Monteverdi, also profoundly influenced the development of Western classical music, establishing Venice as a leading musical centre. Venice's diplomatic genius, its remarkable ability to navigate complex international relations through shrewd negotiation, strategic alliances, and a carefully maintained neutrality, provided invaluable lessons for future states. It demonstrated how a relatively small power, lacking a vast land army, could maintain its independence and influence for centuries through intelligence, flexibility, and a deep pragmatic understanding of geopolitical currents. Its extensive network of ambassadors and spies was legendary, providing the Republic with crucial information and leverage. Today, Venice faces new and existential challenges. The relentless tide of mass tourism, while providing essential economic vitality, threatens to overwhelm its delicate infrastructure, erode its authentic character, and displace its dwindling resident population, transforming it into a mere theme park. Simultaneously, the rising sea levels, a dire consequence of climate change, pose an existential threat to the very foundations of the city, requiring monumental and controversial engineering projects like the Meuse Barrier, designed to protect it from high tides, sparking debates about its effectiveness and long-term sustainability. Yet, despite these formidable modern pressures, the spirit of Venice endures with remarkable resilience. It remains a city of unparalleled beauty, a living testament to 1,000 years of extraordinary history and human endeavour. Its canals still shimmer with reflected light, its gondolas still glide silently along ancient waterways, and its ancient stones still whisper tales of doggers, powerful merchants, daring adventurers, and artistic geniuses. The Lion of St. Mark, though no longer symbolizing a sovereign republic, remains the enduring and beloved emblem of the city, a powerful reminder of its unique past and its undying allure. Venice, the improbable city born of the lagoon, continues to captivate the world, a timeless echo of a golden age that once dominated the seas. Its legacy is not just confined to history books and academic studies, but is palpably present in the very air of its labyrinthine streets, the grandeur of its architecture, and the shimmering light on its ancient waters, a testament to an enduring human triumph.